Hey YouTube, Twig here, bringing you all my Springans Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck profile for February 2021. Wanted to start off the month with one of the newest decks from the Blazing Vortex booster set, being the Springans deck. This deck was originally called Springans in the OCG. The name changed, I don't know why it was changed to the TCG to Springans from Springans, but still it's an awesome deck that has a one focus gameplay style, which is summoning out your go-to Xyz monster, which is Explorer, a rank 8 Xyz monster that can then attach all the different Springan monsters from your hand, field, or graveyard, depending on the monster, and then have some pretty powerful destruction power, also focusing on the Fallen of Albaz monsters and the Fusion Extra Deck monsters for some pretty crazy plays in the deck. It feels like they're all from the Yu-Gi-Oh! Universe with the Tri-Brigades and the Dogmatica monsters, but we'll be focusing on a deck that solely uses the majority of the Springans monsters for your summons. Let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. So for the Springans monsters, I run 3 Springans Pador. With this one, you can tribute this card to target one Springans monster in your graveyard, except for Springans Pador. You can special summon it. If this card is in your hand, field, or graveyard, you can target one Springans Xyz monster you control, attach this card to it as Xyz material, and you can only use each effect of Springans Pador once per turn. So the best thing about this card is its setup. You can special summon another Springans monster onto the field, with the level 8 monsters being a main focus to get out your Springans Ship Explorer. There are other ways, with the field spell being the main way to summon it out, but having this option and then their own monster effects to attach on to your Xyz monster are the main setup for Springans Pador. And the fact that you can tribute this card, setting it up in the graveyard as well, and then just attach it back onto your monster, make it that big of a powerhouse for sure in the deck. I also run, for the other level 4, 3 Springans Rocky. If this card is normal or special summon, you can target one Great Sand Sea, Golden Goganda, or one Springans monster in your graveyard except for Rocky, and add it to your hand. If this card is in your hand, field, or graveyard, you can target one Springans Xyz monster you control, attach this card to it as material. You can only use each effect of Rocky once per turn. So the recycle power, especially if your opponent tries to destroy your field spell, can definitely come in handy, or just recycling back one of your other monsters. While your Pador can special summon, Rocky just adds them back to hand, which is why it's great, because it gives you the field spell option to then activate again, which boosts up the power of your Springans monster. So I run 3 Rocky and 3 Pador, so you always have the level 4 options that are that much easier to summon out from your hand. And the fact that Pador is a 0 attack monster means we also have a machine duplication target, which I'll go over when we get to the spell lineup. I also run 3 Springans Captain Sargus. Another great thing about the deck is that there wasn't too many big rarity cards in this set. I think ultra rare being the highest with the Xyz monster, and all the monsters and the spells being super and the monsters being common, make it that much more easier. But 3 Springans Captain Sargus. If this card is in your hand, field, or graveyard, you can target one Springans Xyz you control, attach this card to it as material, and during your opponent's turn, quick effect, you can detach one material from an Xyz monster you control to target one face-up card on the field and destroy it. So it's basically the captain controlling the ship with this card, and while it's attached on to the Springans Xyz, it gives that monster an additional 500 attack. So along with the field spell boost and this card's boost, you can have some pretty high power levels all together when attacking into your opponent's monsters, and then relying on the destruction plays of both this and your Xyz monsters to destroy all of your opponent's resources. And lastly, for the Springans monsters, I also run 3 Springans Bronga. If this card is in your hand, field, or graveyard, it has the attach monster effect onto a Springans Xyz monster you control. And then also, you can banish this card and one Springans monster with a different name from your graveyard to add one Springans card from your deck to your hand. You can only use each effect of Bronga once per turn. So the fact that it is a Springans card means that we also have the option to add our traps with this, or our spells that we run, the many search power spells especially, and the fact that it says Gold Goganda means you can't search this card, but we can search out the card that searches it, just thinning out the deck even more using this great level 8 monster. And it's also got 500 attack, so if you get this card out into the field, it's another machine duplication target, thinning out the deck and giving you more and more monsters that can potentially overlay into your Explorer Xyz monster. And then for the additional support for the monsters, I run 2 Fallen of Albaz. This is the fusion setup card with us running the Sprint, the Iron Dash Dragon, a machine fusion monster that uses Fallen of Albaz and 1 effect monster special summon this turn, which can be a good majority of the Springans monsters in the deck. But Fallen of Albaz, if it's normal or special summoned, except during the damage step, you can discard 1 card to fusion summon 1 fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters on either field as fusion material, including this card. You cannot use other monsters you control as fusion material. So remember that you're going to use your opponent's resources as this go-to card for your fusion plays, but it means we don't have to run polymerization. We can solely rely on Fallen of Albaz for that fusion setup, and there are a good number of traps that focus on the Springans and Fallen of Albaz in the deck altogether. So running this card as that option just makes for a great setup. If you don't want to run the Fallen of Albaz, you can always take this card out for another hand trap option, but then you'd also have to change some of the lineup in your extra deck since a good number of the fusion monsters focus on this card. And the actual final hand trap that we're running in the deck are the 3 Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. Just my hand trap of choice if your opponent goes first, a great way to disrupt their own plays. Well, you haven't even had your first turn since the main plays in this deck focus on you getting out your Xyz boss monster and then destroying your opponent's cards. So going first, it's great, but going second, just better that way to stop your opponent's main setup play if you know what they're going for. And that is it for the monsters. We'll now move on to the spells. Now, this was definitely one of the more difficult spells to get. I saw at least 4 boxes open this sneak preview weekend, and I still was only to get my hands on one of this card, and I even pulled it myself. I saw no one else pull it. But where we want to run 3 Great Sand Sea Gold Golgonda. This is the field spell for Springans. All Springans, Xyz monsters on the field, gain 1,000 attack. You can only use each of the following effects of Great Sand Sea Gold Golgonda once per turn. If you control no Springans Xyz monsters, you can discard 1 Springans card to special summon 1 Springans Xyz monster from your extra deck. If a face-up Xyz monster you control leaves the field by a card effect, except during the damage step, you can target 1 monster your opponent controls. It cannot attack for the rest of this turn, even if this card leaves the field. So this is your main go-to way to get out our boss monster, which is Springans Ship Explorer. Once we get this card out, then we can use all of the different Springans monsters to easily attach themselves from the field or graveyard or hand onto that card, and then just have more and more resources for it to use to destroy our opponent's card. Basically filling up the ship to send off its crewmates or just the weapon material to destroy our opponent's cards. And search power is a big part of it. This card being searchable off of Bronga, but also being able to search out Gold Golgonda is 3 Springans Watch. You add 1 Great Sea Gold Golgonda from your deck to your hand. If it's already on the field, it lets you add a Springans monster instead. So having your search power taken care of before you even have a card on the field is what I really like about this card. You add it, and then you can send 1 Springans monster from your deck to the graveyard. So being able to search a Springan monster to your hand and then send 1 to the graveyard just gives you more and more material to then attach on to our main Xyz boss monster on the field as well. So 3 of this card I would say is definitely needed for that search power alone. It is a once per turn, but definitely worth it in the end. For the generic spell support, I run 3 Machine Duplication. Our targets for this are our Pedor, having 0 attack, and also our Bronga. Setting these cards up means we can just get that many more from the deck onto the field, which can be just resources to attach on to our Explorer, or Xyz summoning into it if we don't have the spell card to rely on for summoning it out onto the field. And then I also run 2 Iron Call for the level 4 options we have in the deck. This is a pretty good option to use for special summoning back onto the field. Sometimes you just don't want to, use them for the Xyz material. Sometimes you just need those resources for some more extra deck plays, which we run. So being able to rely on 2 Iron Call to mixed in with some of our one-of text for the spells definitely comes in handy. The effects are negated, but like I said, most of the time with this card, you're just going to use them for resources altogether. And for the one-ofs for the spells, I run 1 Monster Reborn. This one's pretty explanatory. I just got over it with the Iron Call special summoning resources, but Monster Reborn doesn't limit us to level 4. We can also summon out the level 8 monsters with one of the requirements for one of our other fusion monsters being Titanclad, the Ash Dragon, just needing a bigger monster to summon out the Ash Dragon from the deck, needing that powerhouse. So Monster Reborn is very useful there. Foolish Burial can set up the Springans in our graveyard that much easier, and then attaching them on to our Explorer. And the 1 Terraforming with the field spell being very important, and being able to search the field spell with Terraforming and then use the Springans Watch to search out a monster just gives us search power after we already utilize the full power of the other search power in the deck. Definitely lots and lots of search power with these spell cards. And that is it for the spells. We'll now move on to the traps. I run 3 Springans Blast. If you control a Springans monster, choose one opponent's main monster zone. If a monster is face up in that zone, during this turn, it cannot attack directly. Also, its effects are negated. If this monster is not in that zone, you can send for this turn. Basically, it cannot be used. And if you control a fusion monster that lists Fallen of Baz as material, you can choose 2 monster zones instead. More setup, more restriction against your opponent. It's basically the ship just blasting the zone that a monster would be and making it unusable, basically engulfing the entire field in flame. A very, very interesting concept with this trap. I also run 3 Springans Call. This is also the trap that makes me think that all of the universes for Dogmatica, Springans, and Tri-Brigade are all linked. You target 1 Springans monster or Fallen of Baz in your graveyard, special summon it, and during the main phase, except the turn this card was sent to the graveyard, you can banish this card and 1 fusion monster in your graveyard to target a Springans Xyz you control, and attach 1 fusion monster that lists Fallen of Baz as material from your X deck onto that monster. So even if we have the many fusion options and just the 2 Fallen of Baz, having multiples of the fusions to at least attach onto a Springans Call makes it all worth it for that setup, giving us more and more Xyz to detach off of the card, whether it be off of the Explorer's main monster effect or with our next trap that we are running, which is Barrage Blast. Also running 3 of this. This was originally a train trap card, but it works very well in the Springans deck also. Being able to, once per turn, even on our opponent's turn, detach any number of materials from Machine Xyz monsters, then target that many cards on the field and destroy them. So basically, since Explorer can't be handled on our opponent's turn, we can at least rely on Barrage Blast to set up that play, and for more burn damage by banishing this card and 1 Machine Xyz monster from our graveyard to inflict damage to our opponent equal to its rank times 200. So I run 3 of it just so we have the banish option, then still able to keep a Barrage Blast on the field. It's a card your opponent will definitely try to avoid destroying, just because then they'll be giving you the burn option once we set up our Xyz in the graveyard. And that is it for the main deck. We'll now move on to the extra deck. I run 3 Springans Ship Explorer, needing 2 or more level 8 monsters, but most of the time you want to use your field spell to set up this card. You can choose one of your opponent's monster zones or spell and trap card zones to attach any number of Xyz material from this card. If you do, destroy the same number of cards your opponent controls in the chosen and its adjacent zone. Monster zones, and during your opponent's main phase or battle phase, quick effect, you can banish this card until the end phase. You can only use each effect of Springans Ship Explorer once per turn. So if you use all the material off of this card, it will definitely be at risk on the field of being destroyed, but being able to banish it, avoiding destruction, and then also summon it back onto the field for you then just to reattach all the material onto it using your other Springans monsters definitely make it the go-to play in the deck. You very rarely use the other rank 8 Exceeds that I run, but I run 1 number 38, 1 number 68, 1 Dingirsu, and the 1 Gear Giant X. I just like having all the options available to you in this deck to use for these Xyz, but most of the time you are going to go into your Springans Xyz monster and not these ones, but they're just options available to you when you can. For the fusion monsters, I run 2 Sprin the Iron Dash Dragon. More setup for your Springan plays, just for the search of a Springans monster or Fallen of Baz once it was sent to the graveyard, or just being able to attach it onto it using one of our trap cards that we run. Same goes for Titanclad the Ash Dragon, having the 2500 attack point option with our opponent's monsters and our Fallen of Baz on the field. And for the Link monsters, I run 1 Barricade Board Blocker, with the field spell being a very important part of the playstyle in the deck. You definitely want to run this, and being able to discard a Springans monster and then just reattach it onto the monster makes this great consistency for the deck altogether. Also 1 Underclock Taker, 1 Nightmare Phoenix, 1 Nightmare Cerberus, and 1 Nightmare Unicorn to finish off the Link monsters and the extra deck. And then as for the go-to plays, relying on your field spell for much of the setup that you'll use, activating this card, having the discard of a Springan card, which if you set up Fedora in the graveyard, to summon out your Xyz play. You can then just attach on Fedora onto the monster, basically almost being a half Xyz summon. But if you have the other cards, like Bronga, in your hand, you can detach that by attaching it onto this card, and then having the detach power can set up Bronga in your graveyard, which then you can revive back onto the field with cards like Monster Reborn, summoning out Bronga. If you have the other ones still in your deck, you can use Machine Duplication to summon out 2 more onto the field, giving you just more resources to then go into another of your ships on the field, and setting up multiples of these, since we aren't limited with the extra monster zone anymore. Just makes for more and more of a powerhouse, and the fact that the field spell will boost up all their power as well from 1600 attack, and having our captain attached also can give it the power boost, putting it up to at least 3100 attack. But that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoyed the video. I wanted to focus on a pure build for the Springans. I know a lot of people are considering mixing it with some of the other support like Triad Brigades and Dogmatica and just more Fallen of Baz focus. But until next time, I hope you all enjoyed the video. Please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and Kira Twig out.